the first big project of the community. And so in order to keep that going, we just have this dedicated call. And we also have a whole group of people that that are focusing on specific areas, and just so there's some space to regularly meet and discuss. But also for anybody else who wants to do anything and have questions and be part of it, because it is a big project. And today, I think the big request that came in was to talk about the principles page. And then I thought that just looking at sprint 1 could also be, give us some discussion points. And then the other thing was what I had in the background here, which is also part of one of these. I created a first draft of a design template for case study pages. But let's start with principles. And Daniel, you said you did another, actually, before we get into that, are there any other topics, anything else you'd like to discuss? All good? Okay, cool. So Daniel, you said on Friday, I think that you revised the principles page, where you did an iteration on it.
Yeah, I had quite a lot of good feedback from a bunch of people. So I tried to work through all of those. So if you haven't read it, I mean, hopefully you've read it by now, but if you hadn't read it before that feedback, it should be in a reasonable shape at the moment. You know, it's still totally open for both structural and detailed feedback. And there's, you know, it's a pretty bare page. There are no illustrations, no nothing. You know, formatting is functional, but certainly not sort of what I've been focusing on so far. But yeah, I hope all of you have had a chance to look at it. But if anybody has sort of like high-level feedback on, like, you know, these are, you know, we're missing something fundamental, or well, I think one of these should not be in there, you know, maybe we should start at that level, and then we can work ourselves down, because of course there's quite a lot of detail into each one, and, you know, you can discuss wording and stuff, but I'd love to hear on the kind of like at a higher level first.
Any takers?
I guess we could go around the whole room, so everybody will get their chance.
Yeah, I was going to say, is everyone aware of what the proposed principles are, or maybe just?
I'm skimming through the pull request right now.
Yeah, okay. At the bottom there, you know, for every pull request, there's a preview. That might be the easiest. So
I've posted that in the chat actually. So if you
great.
Head over to the chat, it's in there.
But I mean, for you, Stephen, if you haven't sort of know what the backstory here is, that we feel the need in many chapters to reference some of these kind of basic things, and instead of duplicating them in each chapter, or like writing similar but not quite the same stuff, we've sort of lifted them out and want to have them at this higher level where they're not attached to any specific chapter, and instead meant to be like, you know, here are some ideas that we as a community think that designers working with us, or, you know, starting out to working with Bitcoin should hopefully try to adhere to. I mean, they're not, you know, nobody's going to come and knock on your door if you don't, but it's something we would like to promote.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. You don't want to have to define inclusion or transparency in every single chapter you write.
Yeah, correct. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 at the moment. And they are decentralization, inclusion, transparency, self-custody, security, privacy, and interoperability.
One top-level question that I was just thinking about as I was looking here at the decentralization. So how much are we focused on this as it relates, basically the influence the designer has on the user? So it's like, okay, make sure that users manage their keys. Like, we're trying to design something, but there's also the aspect of what you as a creator of Bitcoin products can do. So, make sure your source code is open, publish your design files somewhere, collaborate openly, globally, encourage community translations. I don't know, just things that are not directly about the end user experience, but that are more around the aspect of creating Bitcoin products. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Do you feel that? I agree with that. I think this is a guide for people who create products. So I think it's totally okay to try and influence slightly more than the end user experience. But do you feel that the current page under indexes on those things?
I think what made me think about it is the headers. So I think as a lot of user, as I probably and many other people do, is you see the big block of text and you kind of skim it at first, but you look at the big titles and you maybe look at the 1 or 2 sentences that are directly below that are easy to skim. And this one, on the decentralization, it is a very specific point. Encourage users to run their own Bitcoin. So this is one very specific recommendation. While inclusion is more general, it's more of and that what's here, provide equal access, that can manifest itself in 1,000 different ways, in the way that you set up your community or provide support or whatever it is. So that I think that's what made me think about it.
Yeah, that is a very good point. And these one-liners, if you like, they run the risk of not being able to capture what you want to say. So either one could cut them, or in this case, I agree. I mean, saying that everybody should encourage users to run their own node, that's quite a statement. I think a lot of us, and the sort of hardcore Bitcoin community definitely believes that this is the way forward. But then I know myself and other people too, and I'm sometimes on the fence. I don't actually run my own node, so I don't adhere to this myself. So yeah, I mean, I can find it a bit too harsh, perhaps.
I have 2 things to raise on this topic that I think are relevant. One, just more specifically about running the node, and then 2, I think to expand upon what I think Christoph might be saying, as far as running, a Bitcoin node. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I don't personally run my own node, but I do like the idea of it. Maybe I will one day. So, maybe if you wanted to soften that language, perhaps it might be worded to educate the user about the risks of not running their own node, or make sure that the user understands, that, they're getting their information about the blockchain through this third-party service and not directly from the blockchain itself. That could be one way of rewording it. But just broad generally, one thing I'd like to point out, and this might be what Christoph was saying too, but kind of when I read the decentralization paragraph, I love these one-liners. I think these are very easy to use and understand. I think that there are some sentences though that feel like we're talking to different, we're talking to different people. So when we say don't introduce a single point of failure between the user and the Bitcoin network, I feel like we're talking about the developer of the software. But above that, when we say do manage your own private keys, that sounds to me like we're talking directly to the user. And when we say do run a full Bitcoin node when possible, that sounds to me like when we're talking about the user, not necessarily the designer or the developer. So I might suggest we modify some of these sentences that say, allow the user to manage their own private keys, allow the user to run a full Bitcoin node when possible, things like that, just so that if we just go through and make sure that every sentence is talking to the same person.
Yeah, that's a good point. And in that case, I guess we should not be talking to the end user. We should be talking to the maker of the product.
Yeah.
I mean, you could also split it up. Instead of do and don't, you could have, as a designer, I can do X, Y, Z. On the technical side, we can do X, Y, Z. But you kind of break it up in categories where it's more like this principle manifests itself in different ways. In this category, in this way. In that category, in that way.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Alexa, you were going to say something.
Yes. First of all, Daniel, thank you for going through this process. Yeah, I haven't. I think I haven't taken the time to look at it, and I know it's something that is particularly meaningful and important, even to me personally. So, I like that there's an initial quote, because I think if you're just skimming through it, it's important to have it. And just as I'm skimming through it, it's important. I like the do's and don'ts. I understand that there's that they explain things differently based on the product maker and the customer that will eventually use these products. But I don't know how to. I like the do and don't. Maybe just switching it, like he said, on speaking directly to the product makers. But I think I understand why you arrived at this, because I think even if you're a product maker, you also want to follow these things. As far as decentralization goes, I think that, how you have security and you used to have progressive security. I had a thing that was kind of progressive security and education. And it reminds me of decentralization because I was thinking of it more in terms of a road to self-sovereignty. And because it isn't just that it's decentralized and spread all over the world, but it's kind of a personal journey that you take, and that you should be able to follow all those steps towards self-sovereignty. So like you and Stephen were mentioning that you don't have a node yet, but it's something that you like to do. So I think it's important to kind of show product makers or tell product makers that they can have this road of progressive security and education. Because I think both of them are important. And let's see. Inclusion. Here, maybe I'll think about that. I'll continue reading and I'll let you know if I think of anything else.
Yeah, I think I already have like 3-4 actionable items on this particular principle, so that's great. Pablo, next, you provided quite a lot of feedback already, but do you have anything you want to raise?
Did you see his comment? He wrote in the comment that he's onboarding his parents to Bitcoin, so will be listening only.
Okay, that's fine. Sorry.
Check the comment. It ends with, "If needed,
Well,
sorry, but this
you
is
really
important."
Check
He said if you really needed him, he could come.
check his
jump
Twitter
into the
feed as well. His Twitter feed is funny.
Is he live tweeting the event?
Nah, he's I think he said his mom is on bitcoin.org and reading the translation from his nationality, but she doesn't know he's the one that translated it. So he's trying to get unbiased feedback by not telling her, I believe.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, the things I took away from this first one is to look closer at the actual pull quote to make sure that it, represents the proper sentiment of the principle. Look at the language, who it's addressing, and then see if I can weave in the sort of progressive road to decentralization. That maybe running their own node is, not the place to start for everybody, but the place where we want to get them to end up, ideally. Does anybody have anything else on decentralization, Christoph?
I mean, I'll review. I put it on my to-do list to review the page again tomorrow. Because I feel like this is such a big page and it's so complex that every time I talk about it, I find more things. And when I hear your perspectives, I also discover new angles or things to think about. So I want to take another look.
Great.
And the other thing is like how right now you said it's kind of it's just text right now. How can we make this fun?
Yeah.
If that's possible, like serious principles. Or like, how do we represent these things visually? Ideally, we can capture these values in some way.
Alexis got me thinking about the self-sovereign individual being the end goal in many respects, and at least to me, like my limited knowledge on it, I've actually got the book, it's on my to-do list to read, but my limited understanding is that that is very much a spectrum as well. And like you said, Alexis, it's the journey. So I wonder if like that being the kind of, do we need to identify what that means as an end goal, as it relates to at least your financial sovereignty, and then kind of work backwards from there and see what are the things that get you as close to that as possible? Because I agree with all of these principles, but a lot of them as well. For example, decentralization is not a binary thing. It's decentralized or it's not decentralized. That's a spectrum as well, right? So how does a designer start to think about what is sufficiently decentralized and what have I implemented in my application such that a sufficient level of decentralization is achievable for that person?
One thing that came to mind now as well is, the order of these principles, because putting decentralization first might make sense in some respects, right? Like it's how the network started. It's kind of part of its personality. But on the other hand, maybe it's kind of a bad place to start, because we immediately get into very technical things, and it's maybe not the closest to the user. It's hard to see the kind of maybe immediate benefit of it. So I hadn't thought about that until now. I will have a go, but for example, maybe the thing would read completely different if it started with self-custody, because it's much closer to what both of you have talked about, like a kind of, I'm not sure if there is an end goal necessarily, or if there, if we can all stand behind one. But we know that there's an educational and knowledge journey, but at the fundamental level, I think self-custody is what the guide is trying to promote and improve. So I'll have a think about the order as well.
Yeah, it's true. You could also argue for starting with inclusion, because that's kind of the whole point, making it accessible to everyone. And if you want to make it accessible to everyone, then people need to self-custody, because there's nobody else to do that for them in a lot of big parts of the world. And you need to make that freedom a very central. That is one of the very central things for inclusion and accessibility.
Yeah, if you all review it again at some point, maybe that could be a homework, or propose to me which order you would put them in, or at least which one or two would you consider having first.
That makes sense. I did have one more specific one around, and I think it might actually be covered more in the interoperability than I think, support as many relevant BIPs as possible. I was just thinking around kind of this idea of providing the user with as many of the tools possible so they're in complete control of how they transact. So what I mean by that is some wallets implement replace by fee and allow you to change your fee if it gets stuck, and some wallets don't. So I wonder if I feel like you've kind of covered it a little bit when you say in the interoperability, a bit about supporting as many relevant BIPs as possible. So maybe that's kind of what you might have already been thinking, but I was just trying to reason about that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I like that you're more specific. I mean, supporting as many open standards as possible, or BIPs, that's very broad, right? And it's partly on purpose, because I believe that you build great products if you have a very clear use case in mind. And for some use cases, some of these things might not make as much sense. So I'm hard pressed. I don't really want to tell every product exactly what they should do. But on the other hand, I am very curious to see if there's sort of a minimum set of BIPs that we want to establish, or that we want to kind of like promote to say like, look, here's a baseline, right? There are very few reasons not to support these ones. But that's I'd love to have that discussion. But I think maybe it can be linked to from this, or it feels like a discussion that might go on for a while.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Or we can update this when we know. But it's a good point. Which of these principles spoke to you most? Which one where you're like, oh yeah, of course, this one is central, or this one is really important, versus was there one that you felt like, yeah, okay, less hot on this one? Alexa?
You're putting me on the spot here. Let's see.
I'm going to put everybody on the spot.
Let's see. In order to begin with something, you mean?
I can go while you have a think quickly. I think the
do.
self-custody one for me is like, that's a huge one. And for like, yes, that's, as a user, as developer, as designer, I feel like it's all very, very much relevant and necessary and all that kind of stuff. The one that I'm kind of more curious about is the transparency, and more so how it relates to the end user, because at least from my perspective, transparency, of course, is open source in your products and your designs and all this kind of stuff. But its importance is still not clear to me from a user perspective. And I guess earlier on we talked about whether we're actually talking to the end user when we define these principles anyway. But the end user is rarely going to go to GitHub and verify that the application that they've installed is just using the same binary that's been uploaded to the Play Store, for example, or that the Light client wallet that they're using is not, misrepresenting their transactions or anyway, or spying on transactions and all of this kind of things. And I just wonder, I definitely agree from the design point of view that to share work, to share products, to share designs, all that kind of stuff is an absolute. But then, how much does it actually impact the end user? I'm not 100% sure on. So, just had some thoughts on that, really.
I think there's two parts to this. On the one hand, you want people to arrive at self-custody and to kind of take that journey on their own and learn to be autonomous and to take all these steps to having, responsibility over their own funds. And at the same time, you have the product maker who could make it easier for them to reach that path. Who could take all the steps to try and protect more of their privacy, how their security works, and all these things that they may not know, but that because they're product makers, they're kind of protecting the people. So I think there's, I don't know, to me it feels like two things. One of them are the steps that people have to take, and the other one are the steps that product makers take from the very beginning, so people don't have to worry about so many of these things, especially if they don't know what they mean or how important they are to them. So I think a lot of this responsibility will fall on the product makers. I hope they make the best choices.
But but it's also about it's not necessarily about thinking at it. I'm just trying to rethink it. It's not necessarily about thinking about its impact on the end user, rather the end user having the ability to verify and do those things if they want to. For example, the Bitcoin core is open source on GitHub. Like, you might not know programming one day, but you might say, I'm going to spend the next 3 years learning C++ because I want to go and dig into the depths of the Bitcoin core, right? And you can only do that if it's open source and if it's available for investigation in that way. So maybe it's not about thinking about, like, is it actually going to have an impact, but the possibility is there for that person to go and dive deeper if they feel necessary, if they feel it necessary.
This might also be an example where the pull quote is actually slightly misrepresenting the wider principle. My feeling of what the core of this transparency principle is that, if we're promoting people to manage their own private keys, it's extremely important to know how the product actually works. And I think there are two camps here, like the sort of, old school open source people, they're like, well, I won't touch anything that's not open source, forget about it. And then we have the more traditional, or maybe in the more sort of new school product builders, startup world, right? They wouldn't open source anything at all, right, as a starting point. So, that's maybe harsh, but for these, I was thinking more about the people, maybe a bit like me, who we built products before, but not necessarily Bitcoin products. So it doesn't come natural to explain all the inner workings of the product, but it's actually very, very important here, because otherwise, as a user, how do you know? You need to have slightly more knowledge about the product to be able to know if you are storing your keys safely or what's going on there. So that was sort of my intention somewhat behind this, right? To encourage products to actually explain what's going on in plain language, and don't just say like, oh, we've fixed everything, it's super easy, you just trust us, right? Because that's not what we want. But then open sourcing may not be for every product or person, right? So maybe this pull quote needs fixing as well. Other thoughts on this transparency one while we're on the topic?
I'm trying to look at. Let's go ahead.
Well, I wasn't into open source until this community started, but the more that I learn about it, the more it makes sense. So, and also the more it makes sense, even in terms of like product improvement and all these things. So I do think it's important to have some sort of note on that. I know that there will be people who will choose not to do that, but I think it's something that could be encouraged anyway, because there'll be people who may not have even thought about this, that could give it a second thought and maybe become part of the movement into being more open and transparent. Now, and if we think of Bitcoin, obviously, it's a transparent product. So I think it would be good if more products continued in that path, And I mean, people will read this and there'll be people who say, oh, it's not for me, so I'm not going to do it. But I think it's important to have it there. And that made me think of another thing. When speaking with Johns, I asked him what his principles were, and he had an extra one that I think could be important here. And I know that a lot of these that you're focusing on are just about Bitcoin. And he had empathy as one of the principles. And when you think of empathy, it's about caring about the people that you're creating for, kind of figuring out what it is that they need, how you could help them, all those things. And I think it kind of makes you think of them, of people, not just users or but actual people that are going to benefit from your products. So I like the thought of having something like that here too. And thinking outside of Bitcoin, and this is separate from what John said, I wonder if we could also have something that is more kind of UX based or something like that. I know that a lot of the things that maybe we're seeing is that there's a good deal of complexity in everything. So maybe part of it would be focusing on simplicity, on trying to make things that are just essential and things that are, I don't know. I'm sure you may be better at explaining this than I am. But maybe it would be important to say something like that, not to try and make it so complex, and have that progression. And maybe you already have something like that in the progressive security. And I don't know. And like I said, I also thought maybe this was about education. And I know that sometimes when you think of education, you think you're going to read like tons of paragraphs of stuff and bore people to death. But no, I think there may be ways to make education part of the product in a way that's simpler. And that'll be important for people who are starting out on Bitcoin.
Yep. Yeah, I would agree with that one. That was something that so I see the two sides. One, I think Connor thought more about, which is how the sausage is made, I guess, in the background, coming from a German person, of course. How the product is actually built, that you can go and look at the code, which very few people do. But it is incredibly important that those few people who want to do that they have the ability to do that and then raise an alarm if something's not okay. And the other thing is, as a user, for me to just understand what's going on, but also to understand what's not going on, to make a point that, hey, we're not collecting any data, or we're not storing your backup. You need to sort this out because things are kind of different. And then the other thing that I think a lot about is, to put an example here, this is from, in my background here, that's from Blue Wallet. It's a multi-sig setup. So you say, like, hey, I want to do a vault, best security for large amounts. That's pretty good. And then you get to this intro screen. It says a vault is a 2 of 3 multi-sig wallet, which is already we're kind of getting confusing. 2 of 3 what? What multi-sig what? And then the next screen, it says vault key 1, create new import, and I'm lost here. So more like clearly saying, like, here, this thing coming up that's going to cost you a bit, or saying exactly what you're going to do, guiding people through, like, before you start, make sure you have your cold card ready and your Kobo vault, and then now on your Kobo vault, go to the settings and then click this and that, and to be super transparent about what you're going to do, take people through the steps afterwards, tell them when something has successfully worked out, what's there to be concerned about, those type of in-application user experience things. For me, that's a big part of transparency also, or like clearly laying things out for people.
Yeah, at the
it's
moment,
not that there's anything hidden if you don't do it, but you're relying on people to fill in the blanks.
There's a bit about that in the inclusion principle at the moment. So, for example, this means using plain and familiar language, explaining things in the context where they are needed, not overwhelming people with technical detail and more. Do you feel that they make more sense in transparency?
No, I think inclusion is more how you present it, so the largest amount of people can make sense of it. And then the transparency is more that you put in the extra effort of laying things out. It's like basically you're documenting, you're creating a lot of extra documentation, and either you put it on the website or you put it in the app, and you make people click through. It's basically you create more documentation, more material that people can review.
Okay. I got it.
Yeah, I don't know. We don't have to go into that much detail, but that's kind of the cool thing, right? That these are principles and they can manifest themselves in many different ways. And as a developer, you see it differently than as a translator, a designer, and whatnot.
Yeah, for sure. Going back to self-custody, Connor, you mentioned that as a kind of one you felt was important. It's actually pretty short. Do you feel that the pull quote represents what you think about when you think self-custody, and also, yeah, the rest of it?
Let users control their private. Yeah, I do. Because I feel like that pull quote definitely encapsulates the unconfiscatability and unseizableness of what helps to underpin some of the other stuff. Like, there's the argument to be had that self-custody is the most secure way of custodying Bitcoin. It ultimately helps to promote decentralization as well, because I guess traditionally custodians are honeypots for everyone's Bitcoin, and if they do get hacked, that's pretty bad for the network in its entirety. Self-custody allows you to some degree have a level of transparency, because you can run your own node and all of that kind of good stuff. And yeah, I feel like it underpins almost everything here. It is quite short. That users control their own private keys, custody funds, but that might not necessarily be a bad thing.
No, in a way, the shorter we can write them, the better, because I look at some of them that are getting a bit long already, right? The security one, I guess. It's a high risk of people skipping through a lot of.
It's also we haven't said anything about it explicitly, but the permissionless nature of being able to self-custody as well. Not sure where we highlight permissionlessness. I guess that's when we talk about inclusion, not needing credit checks and gatekeepers and that kind of stuff. But I like it.
Yeah, I mean, you could expand it a little bit to make it more about putting users in control. Like, let's say, let your application gracefully fail if, let's say, your company's servers are not available, that they can still do things. And that would be a larger point where it's not just self-custody as in relation to, or control as it relates to funds, just sending stuff, but a larger point about keeping users in as much control as it is appropriate to your product. Because let's say you build some allowance, some wallet for kids, then it's a different balance of what's appropriate. Here's John's. Did you make it to the grocery store?
Yeah, I got no food.
Good. I want you to go hungry.
Popped in like 5 minutes ago.
Good.
Cool. Any other thoughts on self-custody?
It's awesome.
I hear. That's what I hear on the street.
Well,
and nerve-wracking at times.
That the security paragraph is kind of getting big. And I know that you're kind of having this transition between self-custody and security. I wonder if some of this information could be jumped up, maybe it's a transition, but maybe part of this could be up there. Let's see. No, maybe not. Maybe it is just a transition.
Is it okay if we spend another 5 minutes on this and then spend a little bit of time on the case study page mockup?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
We're around 45 minutes in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We can also keep going, which is fine. It seems like this is a very good review here.
Since John's just hopped in, did you have any high-level thoughts?
Well, one thing just popped into my head with the security one. There's a paragraph about like education and awareness. That kind of ties into the transparency part, I guess, as well. Yeah, that's just the one thing that popped into my head. Just looking at this.
Yeah, thank you. We discussed education a bit earlier as well, and something I'm going to try and weave in to maybe a few more of them. And, looking at this principle now, it is getting long, and, I'll just do some editing. I'm sure I can say the same thing with slightly less words. Cool. Well, I mean, this has already been very useful to me, and I'm sure I hope we don't stop talking about this after this review. So, I will do some more work on it this week, and then I might post it in the general channel in Slack and see if we get a bit wider input here. I feel that this should be pretty controversial, but maybe I'm just not casting the net wide enough.
Oh, that's okay. I think it's okay sometimes to be a little controversial.
No, but I meant I would expect people to get more upset about what I've already written.
More of, why did you do this?
I mean, in this design community, what's the only thing that gets people upset? It's like where the Bitcoin is capitalized or just do that, and then people will show up.
Yeah, no, I started there, but I got shut down pretty quickly.
You could try camel casing it.
I guess if I mention some altcoins in there, maybe we get some attention.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks.
Bitcoin SV design guide.
Yeah, exactly. Inclusion means all the Bitcoins.
Yeah.
I'll try and see if I can dedicate a little bit of time this week and share some extra comments. But hey, have you guys ever heard of where the word user comes from? I'll share a Wikipedia link with you, but ever since I've heard of that, every time I read user, it makes me cringe. So I don't know if there's that. Here, I'll share a Wikipedia link.
See, Daniel, you asked for controversy and you got it.
Yeah. I think back to when I first started writing anything for the guide, and I tried very hard to avoid user. I used the word customer, but that obviously also isn't right, because that sort of implies that you are, you're getting paid, and that's often very, very often not the case. But I agree. I dislike the word user, and maybe we should make more conscious effort to maybe replace it. But I feel people is very indistinct as well. But sometimes I throw in a people. But yeah, I'd love some suggestions on how maybe we could avoid users. Well, not avoid users, but the word users.
Yeah, I saw the Social Network, and they were talking about like addictive applications and stuff, and they're like, which other industry refers to their customers as or like people as users, and it's drugs, the drug industry. I'm like, oh shit, yeah.
Well, I've heard Bitcoin is pretty addictive.
And a religion, so.
Yeah. Okay, let's move over to Christoph so we get some time on that too. Thanks, everybody.
Cool. All right, thanks. So this is part of the next sprint. One of our goals over next weeks, months, I guess, is to expand, extend, extract the case studies. So here, for example, is Daniel's case studies. Here is a prototype about an application for daily spending that showcases basically how the key management works in a wireframe application. There are some design considerations and technical considerations, but the thing is now, if we take, let's say, one of these prototypes or case studies and we put it on a whole dedicated page, then we can add a lot more to it. We can add more detail, make it more helpful to the viewer, the designer, the developer. So the idea here was for me to, I'm here in the Figma file. There are all these other different page mockups here, home page, guide page, all this stuff. So I just started throwing in a few things and trying to think a little bit about what the structure could be like. And I think one of the biggest things we have to figure out is how do we split these up? Do we say we have one mobile wallet and one desktop wallet and they just cover it all? Or do we have a case study for, let's say, mnemonic seed recovery? Or do we have a case study for spending via Lightning? Do we have these very specific user flows, or just how do we organize this stuff? So I don't have a clear answer there. Maybe we'll have a mix. Cool, too. Then I tried to come up with the basic structure here. So at the top, you just kind of want to figure out how this fits into the overall Bitcoin experience. What's the problem this is solving? Why do people use this? What are the goals? What do you want to try to avoid? What are the pain points? Maybe this could even be backed up by actual user quotes and maybe some research, which would be fantastic. Then I was thinking it could go through what a user experiences internally, I guess. It's like, I want to pay somebody, and then they give me an address, and then I want to do this, and then I want to do that. Not so much thinking about what they see, but more about what they go through. And something just shut off here. Heard some beeping sound. You can hear me, right?
Yep.
Can hear you.
Okay,
I can't hear
cool.
any beeping.
Okay. It sounded like some device was shut off here. But everything's working. Okay. Then I was thinking, well, okay, after people are kind of primed, they know what this is about, they know what users are going through, you could show the prototype or frame the prototype, allow people to access the prototype, probably some external thing, which could also be higher up. We could decide we want to throw people right into it. After that, you could go through, let's say you show, because in a prototype, you see things as a sequence. You never see everything at once. And it's kind of hard to compare. Like, how did this screen change that I was earlier to later then? And then, so I was thinking you could just show all the different screens, maybe as a sequence, each one with some description. So as a designer or developer, I understand, okay, this is kind of the overall structure. This is what's going on. And then the next step logically would be to focus on, let's say, some unique screen or some unique components or some unique experience, and just outline it, maybe just show it bigger, show some variations, maybe put some recommendations in there. Could look in a few different ways, whatever people want to do. There could be do's and don'ts. Kind of grab this one from, I forgot, Johns, did you share this one? I thought this was kind of a nice format where you focus on one component and say, here's a good version of that component, here's a bad one. So it's just very clear, and people almost don't even have to read to understand what's going on. Throw in some recommendations and maybe end up with some type of fact sheet. Could be products that this is inspired by, other types of factual information, and then further reading, and that could go. That goes to one of the things that I thought about, which is what not to include. So I don't think these should include technical explanations. Like, if this is about, let's say, mnemonics, that should not be explained here. That should be somewhere else. And this is about the user experience and how that is framed and the decisions to make and how to present things. So that's kind of where I am. It's a very long page. And of course, it's not realistic, but I was just thinking about the structure and then kind of filling things in. And of course, it all depends on what use cases or prototypes we actually want to create. Some might be short, some might be long. So what do you think?
Love it.
Yeah, first off, yeah, really awesome. The question I had is like, what's the first thing that we kind of want the user to do when the person to do when they land on this page? Is it like quick getting a high level of like seeing the Figma prototype, or is it like consuming the content? Like, how do we envision that kind of?
I have an opinion, but I'm curious to hear what others think. And my opinion is probably already reflected in this design.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think I have a an inkling that these pages will be fantastic entry points for a lot of people, and they could be pretty SEO friendly, especially if they are kind of. I like the idea of having a mix of like full-featured wallet case studies and also like smaller parts, like, you know, here's exactly how to represent the seed phrase when someone's trying to back it up. You know, that's a very good one, and it can be a short one. So I think a lot of people will be coming in very, very clear idea of what they're looking for, and that's probably going to be reflected by the title of the case study. So in this case, mobile wallet for data spending, I mean, I think the overview of the screens rather than the prototype, for example, might be a good one. Prototypes, I agree with Christoph, like they're kind of fun to do, and but you might only use them once, right? I'm not sure how much value they provide continuously.
If I could add to that, the value of prototypes, I think they take you out of the abstract and into the real. You can pull them up on your phone, and you can lean back, and your brain changes. You're not the designer brain anymore. You're kind of like the lazy clicker person who, you know, you change. You look at it from a different perspective. So I think they're super important for specifically that ability. But yeah, you as a design, you probably spend more time with the static designs than on the prototype. Then you can do user testing. Somebody could take this and put it in front of their users and see how they respond.
A mental model I'm kind of comparing this to, you know, it's not quite fair, but like as a developer, you know, you have Stack Overflow, which maybe some of you are familiar with. It's like you Google, like, you know, how do I do this in this language? And then, you know, 99 times out of 100, there will be like a Stack Overflow question. Someone has asked exactly the same thing, and there'll be 10 answers, and hopefully one of them works. And so I'm kind of, you know, one type of person that will come to this page, they just like, okay, well, how do I do it? How do I do it? I don't want to read much, you know, I just want to kind of get to the point. And that's obviously slightly harder if it's a full-featured wallet, but maybe for a designer, maybe the point is the design. Like, you know, so maybe you want to actually see the screen, see the mock-up or whatever. But I think we just have to try this.
Is there room for like tear down style case studies on existing wallets as well? Like if the community identifies, oh, like Moon executed that Lightning transaction flow almost perfectly, is there like room to create a place for a teardown on that on their specific wallet and some commentary around it and stuff like that? Do you think? Or I think it would be could be cool to have.
Yeah, I don't know. I see that you've worked a lot on this, Christoph. Where can we find this stuff? Is it previewable somewhere?
But this is all everything I have in this is in this same, and I'll share the link. It's in the same Figma file. This is a public community file, but I haven't republished it with this content yet. So I'll put the link in here in the chat. It takes you directly there. Yeah, so I think something like the teardown would be.
Christoph.
Sorry?
Yeah, sorry. You were biting your tongue, I could see.
Yeah, I think the teardowns are super cool. If the Moon team's cool with that, that might be something to ask. But I think there's a ton we can learn from just like looking at screenshots, you know, trying out other things, documenting for each other in the community and whatnot. I think there's a huge amount to be learned. What the right format and place for that is, could be here, could be somewhere else. I don't know.
Yeah, my feeling about it is similar in that I think we should try and use all the good work people have done already in existing products. I'm slightly hesitant to do like a whole case study about a specific product because it feels like it could feel like we're promoting a certain thing over another, when that's just not the case. But if it's about a specific part of a product, I could see it not being very controversial to include, several screenshots of the same screen or the same flow from, 3 of the best, for example, right? Like, if you, and then you can also get an overview and a range and compare, like, oh, okay, well, they did it slightly differently. That suits my product better. So I might favor that approach slightly.
I think we could have some examples maybe of specific cases that could help each use case, and if people give permission to it, yeah, that'd be fine. I think I do like the idea of possible prototypes. And going back to a bit further back, I think it's different when you look at the product and you click through it. It gives you a different idea of what's needed. So on some cases, I know that that's probably something that we're going to need. I also think that it's important to have some kind of a mock-up or something like that, because it makes it easier for you to understand what you're trying to do, especially if you're more of a visual person who's trying to figure out how it could fit better. I think those are important. And, I think you have something good here because it kind of covers everything. It has text, it has possible prototype, it has possible mock-ups, and yes, it could have possible examples. And maybe there's a way to have some of these things in a way that you could pick based on what you're writing about and how you want to display things. So you have like a general content page, but maybe, it's probably not so difficult to do, right? To just pick one. So it doesn't necessarily follow this format all the time. If people, no, I don't know. I think against
it can be whatever is most appropriate for whatever you're trying to communicate. If it's like a full-fledged wallet, it's probably very different than you're trying to focus on some micro interaction around Lightning or whatever it is. So I think it's very flexible. It's just a series of pieces, but then as you work on your case study, you have to think through the structure and how you take people through, how you get them from understanding the bigger problem and the solution to the details, and then allow them to go away with something actionable or something useful. Yeah, and here in my background is, I like, that is something that I always do. I take a ton of screenshots, I compare them, I put them next to each other. I've tried probably around 40 different wallets over the years, and taking folders are full of screenshots, and sometimes there's copies, sometimes there are illustrations. It could be anything. Sometimes it's just to see what not to do. I find this super helpful.
Yeah, I think it's awesome. So what's your next step? What are you going to do next?
I mean, if everybody's okay with this, well, the goal for this sprint was just to kind of rough in the template, and if that can be iterated on, and then let's see, how do I get to the sprint here?
Where do you think they should live in the nav?
Oh, I just created here. Subfolder, but they could be further down to, not sure.
Well, I think they should definitely be sort of top level visible. And then I guess the order doesn't matter that much.
You mentioned no technical details in the case study and just focusing on the user aspect of it. What would count as technical?
Well, so like if we're talking about recovery phrase here, I would put something. If there's something super technical, you have to understand that takes more than a sentence to explain. I would just say, for these design decisions to make sense, or so, make sure to read up on, recovery phrases and why they are what they are and how many words there are and why people should not print them out and, what BIP that is defined in. All of that stuff, I think should go somewhere else.
So, for instance, a comment about within the case study prototype or one of the screens, it may show like switching from let's say for Android cloud backups, like switching your account or something, your Google, because you have to like sign in with the Google account or whatever, and then there's like another screen where it's like loading or something, like fetching data or whatever, right? Like that kind of like borderlines some technical aspects of the recovery part. So yeah,
I think there's the larger point there is cross-device, cross-operating system stuff. It's just like, don't just test your website on Chrome and on your laptop. Also check it on your phone and on Safari and Firefox and Internet Explorer 6. It's, whenever you integrate with something else, whenever you use tie in something with the operating system that you don't have full control over, just make sure to think through it and design for it. And if the case study can include both solutions of how to do it on Android and in iOS, then that would be cool. I think otherwise, I think it would still be okay to say, this case study focuses primarily on Android or iOS. And then there's like, here's a tip, make sure to do it to also, design this and develop this on Android because there's this and that difference and some considerations. I think there's some freedom.
No, I was going to say on the tech news, John, do you mean as well, like, so in that example, I think you're more referring to the different states that the flow could be in, loading state and error state or whatever state. So I feel like that can probably be as a concept abstracted away. But I think what you're saying is interesting because, for example, in a transaction flow, as a designer, do you need to know that there's 3 stages where you create, you sign, and you broadcast, and within those 3 distinct pieces of the transaction flow, you might need to add in some loading state at the point of broadcasting the transaction to the network? Or do you mean like those kind of more like the designer needs to know like what is actually the technical implementation of like that thing happening? Or
yeah, partially because you mentioned 2 things there, and it also got me thinking. So like for the transaction flow, there may be a point where let's say we're doing a case study for something like Spectre, right? Like some kind of flow with the signing and stuff. We're kind of I don't know, going into like some Spectre's a bit more technical, right? So like I feel that we would naturally have to, or I would actually naturally like start explaining some of the technical things that are happening there. Like by getting the PSBT file, sending it over to the other device for signing.
I think it depends on what you're trying to do. If you think is that so important for designing that particular experience and understanding why it's designed the way it is, then totally put it in. It just shouldn't end up with like a whole page just explaining some technical stuff. I think that's where we can. I was wondering about that at the top of the case study too. Should it say like prerequisites, like to understand this fully, make sure to read X, Y, and Z, or also maybe say this case study does not focus on visual design, and that's why it looks kind of goofy, but it is more of a technical exploration of approaches to X, Y, Z. Like you make it clear at the top what it is and what it isn't, and then it's the user goes into it not expecting anything. Or like you could say that this doesn't focus on all the interactive states. This is more of a general exploration about how to structure certain flows.
You know, I think I see John's point in the sense that I am sure there's things that you need to know in order to design something.
Mhm.
So I know that you have, Christoph, you have all of these things that you could pick and choose based on what you need. And I know that you're trying to keep it simple. Maybe there could be a little bit of a section that people could use, technical details to keep in mind, and just have like a soft explanation of, just remember this doesn't work with this, or this has to work with this. Because, and I think that'll be particularly useful to designers, because a lot of the times we do not know what's important in terms of the technical side of it. And sometimes you suggest this thing and you arrive and then it's like, oh, it doesn't work because it needs this thing or that thing. And I think it's important to have it there.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
have it
and
as a choice, you know, if
Yeah.
it's necessary.
Yep. And like I said, this is just the first draft, and whatever case studies, they may require a lot more technical stuff. And maybe people say, I always tend more on the visual side, but people may say, hey, I want more technical stuff, and then we'll just put more technical stuff in.
Or you could, you know, we could always link back to another part, but to have the note there just so designer be aware that this is happening.
Yeah, I just think we have so many documentation pages that are about technical stuff. Then like these are not about technical stuff, right? They mention technical stuff, they use technical stuff, but that's not their primary focus. And then other pages, they are about more technical stuff. That is their focus. That's just my strong opinion, weakly held. Yeah. Cool. So we're like 15 minutes over the hour. Anything else you wanted to chat? I'm very intrigued by this Wikipedia page here about loser.
No, I'm good. That was a good session. Thank you.
John's is falling asleep. No, he's thinking a lot. You're still thinking.
Yeah, I'm thinking. There's some components in there because like I'm kind of also walking through like some user flows for sending and receiving, and there's some components within there that seem like I can also use them, and then it makes me think like
What do you mean by components? Interface components?
so
Or
you have
component page template that you want to use for
the page template, for example. You have what do you call it, like the thing with the steps, yeah. So that seems like something that could get included on like sending or receiving. Just at like first glance, it seems like something that could be included there. Yeah, kind of like you have something similar there also. So I'm kind of like trying to figure out like how does content on payments relate to the case studies, and what would a case study be if itself it looks like a case study?
Yeah. You have to dig deep into the content, just write it and then see what shape it wants to take.
Well, it's taking case study like shape now. No.
Stephen gone. Okay. I'm gonna shoot.
Cool. Yeah, I need to go as well, but see you on Slack.
Cool.
All right.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm
Awesome.
going to stop recording here too.
See you next time.